Hello, my name is Domingo Morel. I'm an associate professor of political science and public service at NYU Wagner. And today I'm going to talk about education policy during Trump's second administration. Like many different agencies, programs, the Trump administration has made some significant changes during the first 53 days of the administration. And education policy is no different. We learned that the Trump administration was going to lay off 1,300 employees from the Department of Education, which represents about half of all of the employees in the Department of Education. And there's also talk about abolishing the Department of Education altogether. It remains to be seen if this is possible or not. It is not likely, given that it would take an act of Congress to abolish the Department of Education. But still, there are talks that is what the administration wants to do. And even if the administration does not abolish the department, there's still many things that they can do to affect education in this country, including laying off 1,300 employees. So before we get to the implications and why it's significant to understand this policy of laying off so many people in the Department of Education, I think it's important for us to know what the Department of Education does. So the Department of Education is actually one of the newer agencies in our federal government. It was created in 1979. And as you can see, the department serves nearly 18,000 school districts across the country and over 50 million students, K through 12. But equally as important, the Department of Education also has a significant role in providing services, support in higher education as well, by providing scholarship and grants like the Pell Grants to students, providing grants and other types of programs to support research in institutions of higher education. So the Department of Education plays a really important part here. And so what I want us to think about is three different ways in which the Department of Education plays a significant role. The first is funding. And so yes, the Department of Education does not provide a significant amount of funding for K through 12 education. Most of the dollars that go to public education in the United States actually come from state and local resources. And as you can see from here, the different ways that public education is funded in this country. But the Department of Education does play a really important role through what we know as Title I funding. And Title I funding is funding that's specifically allocated for low resource school districts in this country, for communities that do not have the necessary resources to adequately educate their children. The second part, which is also important, is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And so the federal government has to step in to make sure that all students, regarding their ability, and specifically here we're talking about students with some demonstrated disability, get the support and right to public education that every other student in this country has. And so for a very long time, our country did not do a good job, and some will argue still need to go further in providing an adequate education to students with disabilities. And the Department of Education provides, through monitoring and providing resources, the things that communities and students and parents need to adequately educate children with disabilities. And then the final one that I want to talk about here is the Office of Civil Rights. And so the Office of Civil Rights plays a very, very important role in what the Department of Education does. And as you can see, the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights is responsible for ensuring equal access to education for all students and to promote educational excellence through vigorous enforcement of civil rights in the nation's schools. And they do this through enforcing civil rights laws, investigating civil rights complaints, and collecting data on civil rights and the schools. And this is really, really important because the reason why the Department of Education was created in 1979 is because there were a lot of things that were happening that states and local governments were not doing to ensure that all students get an adequate education. So for instance, in 1957, after the schools were desegregated following Brown v. Board, there were children in Little Rock, Arkansas, Black school children in Little Rock, Arkansas, who were trying to attend the schools, desegregated schools. And the local community there and local government, including state government, would not provide the protections to these students. And these students had to endure violence and hostility from local governments and other communities. And so it took the federal government to come in and protect these young children from the type of violence that they had to experience on their way to school and in school. Then in the 1970s, when the city of Boston and its local school committee did not, refused to desegregate the schools. It took the federal government to intervene through the courts to make sure that the students, Black children, had the ability to attend desegregated schools in the city of Boston. And so the federal role here is really important. And that's why by 1979, we saw that the Department of Education had to be created to provide these protections when state and local governments refused to do so. And so by cutting 1,300 employees, many of them who come from the Office of Civil Rights, it is something that we are all concerned about when we're thinking about what is the federal role going to be when local communities feel that there's some discrimination happening and cannot turn to their local governments or state governments for protection. Traditionally, this is the role of the federal government, and with this policy, it could be that it's very much endangered the ability of communities to defend themselves and to get the adequate services that they need. So, in the face of all of this, what can communities do? I've been studying education politics for a number of years, and I want to offer some thoughts on, based on my research, what I've seen other communities do when they need to bring attention to the different needs that they have in their communities. And so the first thing I want to bring attention to are court challenges. So, right now during Trump's first 50 or so days in office, we've seen that one of the ways that communities, employees, and others have been able to stop some of these, what many consider draconian measures from going forward is that the courts have stepped in to intervene. And in fact, that's one of the things that many are going to be doing with education. 21 state attorney generals, including our own here in New York, Attorney General Letitia James, filed a lawsuit in a court in Massachusetts saying that these 1,300 layoffs are going to drastically affect the ability of students in this country to be adequately educated. And so we see already that many are organizing through the courts to try to stop this from happening. So that's one thing that people can do. A second one is to organize hearings all throughout the country to bring attention to the harms that this may cause or will be causing to communities. And so while many think that obviously the Department of Education is, a federal agency, and therefore these hearings need to happen in Congress, it doesn't necessarily have to happen in Congress. We can have hearings all across the country. We can have hearings in state legislatures. We can have hearings in city councils. We can have hearings at school board meetings or at school sites altogether, where elected representatives from all levels of government, from Congress all the way down to local school boards, can bring people together to talk about how these policies are affecting them. And I've seen through my research how this can be an effective way to bring attention to these issues. And the final part that I want us to think about is protest, which is one of the critical aspects of democracy, of American democracy, is the ability to protest. And we've seen time and time again, when communities feel that they're not getting the kind of things that they need, the services that they need to adequately educate their children and many other things, that people do protest, including students. And so I think it's vital that we think about the role of protest when we see policies that are harming communities as a way to stop this from happening and to imagine and to envision something different. And so in closing, I want to offer this quote from Sharia Smith, who's the president of the American Federation of Government Employees, representing those workers in the Department of Education. And I saw this quote and it reminded me of the kind of things that we do here at NYU Wagner. We're a school of public service where our mission is to train and develop, prepare students that are either working or going to work in public service. And what she said is, what is clear from the past weeks of mass firings, chaos, and unchecked professionalism is that the regime has no respect for the thousands of workers who have dedicated their careers to serve their fellow Americans. So I think education is just one part of many different areas where Americans who are dedicated to public service, including our own students here at Wagner, are very much right now concerned about the future. And so through education, through what our students do, whether it's protests, hearings, or court challenges, we should not feel that we are powerless, that there are many things that we can do to make sure that every student receives an adequate education.